Not on my watch. Those words are my mission statement when I am in charge of my grandsons. Nothing is going to happen to these boys, not on my watch. I'm not going to be the one who has to explain to their mother how in the world they scraped their knee, got sick, or horror of all horrors, got lost. You know that feeling, right? There's nothing quite like taking a 5-year-old to Toys R Us. One moment they're looking at the latest Star Wars characters, and then the next, before you know it, they're 5 aisles away. You see all these children running around the store like maniacs, so you call out Josh, and after a few unresponsive calls, you're shouting just short of screaming, Joshua! And then he shows up. The child has no idea he's such valuable cargo. They just go about their business of figuring out how do we enjoy this being spoiled by spending Grandpa's money? They don't know the tension that a trip to the toy store can create. Well, whether you know it or not, kid, not on my watch. So it is with Jesus. Not on his watch. Now, there are 2 ways to preach this text. For those of you who long for the old Dutch way, we would now haul out and put up, we wouldn't have had screens, but we would tell you all to take out, or you would have all memorized the Heidelberg Catechism, the Canons of Dort, and for those of you who don't know what that is, don't worry, it doesn't matter right now. But anyway, we would read you all the answers, and that would be a way of doing it. And I love the Heidelberg Catechism, and I love the Canons of Dort. I love the doctrine of the perseverance of the saints. But I don't think that's what Jesus wants us to talk about today. Not directly, anyway. I mean, I know I could talk about John Calvin. John Calvin's sort of the theological person that we follow in our denomination. Yeah, the Canons of Dort come up with this little saying, tulip. We could talk about tulip, not the flowers, but the 5 points of Calvinism. And it ends with a beautiful, wondrous, amazing P for perseverance of the saints. But you don't really want to know about all of that right now. Not like that. I don't think that's the sermon Jesus would preach. You see, Jesus had been walking over the ground, the very ground, of course, that he had created. And he'd been doing all these wonderful miracles. Blind can see, lame can walk, and still people are saying to him, tell us plainly. If you are the Christ, tell us plainly. Just say it. Stop dodging the question. Are you the Christ? Are you the Messiah? Are you the promised Son of God? If so, just say it. Isn't that the question we all really ask, right? Who are you, anyway, Jesus? Do you come here today wondering really who is this Jesus? Is he really God? Maybe that's your question today. I want to assure you of this. There's nothing wrong with asking that question. In fact, Jesus encourages it because that's the first step of faith. Well, Jesus gives this great answer. I hope you are asking that question. I hope you're saying to Jesus, if you have any doubt, tell us plainly, are you the Christ? Now, you have to understand, with my background, when I read the Bible, I try to think about how would I do this if I was like playing the role, if I was acting it out. So when I read this verse, I wonder, how did Jesus say this? I thought Corey gave a very fine reading of it. But another could be, and this is sort of how I think I would play the part. I did tell you! I did tell you! But you don't believe me. I think Jesus, sometimes must have reached a boiling point. What in the world do you people think? The works I've been doing. The lame can walk, the blind can see. The works I do in my Father's name testify about me. I did tell you. What more do you need to know? You see, that's, I think, the sermon Jesus always preaches. Jesus doesn't preach the 5 points of Calvinism because he doesn't need them. Because his life is tulip. His life are the canons of Dort. His life is the only sermon people really need to hear. That's the plain thing that Jesus says to the people. I did tell you, I think we get evangelism backwards in our country. If I was going to design an evangelism program, and I've done the other way, where you take the little brochures and you talk about, 3 spiritual laws and all of that, and I think it's wonderful people try that. But I'll tell you what, I've tried that with people who aren't believers. I've talked to people who aren't believers, or what I call near believers. I don't know that there aren't non-believers. I think there are near believers, because I think that's Reformed. I think that's what it is. Everybody's near. Some don't even know they're near, but they're nearer than they think. Anyway, I've tried that. I've talked to them about all of the things about, just say Jesus is Lord and so forth and so on. Jesus, forgive me, I'm a sinner and so forth and so on. And after it's all done, I hear, well, that's very interesting, but what does that have to do with me? You see, it doesn't start with the head. It starts, as Jesus says, with the ears and with the eyes. Seeing the works of the Father is how you start to know who Jesus is. Not by logic, not by reason. I think that comes later. I think the route that Jesus takes is the route that the church needs to take as well. So here's what I'm asking you to do this week. If you're needing to see the works that the Father has done, that testify about Jesus, that's going to be worth all the sermons. This is going to be over in 9 minutes. You're not going to be persuaded of anything. But maybe this I can persuade you. If you need to see the works of Jesus, here's what I want you to do. You go to the Winnick Funeral Home tomorrow night. Go there and don't just go through the line and leave. Stay and watch. Or if you have some friend that has a funeral this week, you go and you watch some Christian funeral. And you watch Jesus in action. You watch the people going through a line. Maybe you've been in the receiving line where a church family has come through. You watch. I want you to think about signing up to be a mentor for Kids Hope USA. And you go and you spend 1 hour, 1 week, once a week at that school, at Grand School, with one child. And you wait until you see that child look at you and say, "Are you Jesus?" You sign up for the First Hope community meal. And you go be the hands of Jesus that serves some stranger what will be maybe their one hot meal of that week. You go see Jesus in action. Because that's where you're going to learn about that Jesus is still alive. That Jesus really did rise from the dead. It's going to be in what you see, in what you do, in what you see other people doing. The first step of faith is to see the works of Jesus. Faith, then, I think, really works backwards from the way we normally think about it. Because seeing is believing, but more than that, seeing is hearing. That's what Jesus says. Hearing the voice of Jesus say, "Not on my watch." Here's the thing about sheep. They know the voice of the one to whom they belong. A stranger's voice can yell all the right words, whisper all the right words, the sheep won't come. But if a shepherd's voice, their shepherd's voice calls them, they turn around and they come home. If there are two flocks all mixed up together, all that needs to happen is the shepherd of one and the shepherd of the other both call, and the sheep separate and go the right way with their proper shepherd. But you say, well, humans aren't sheep. That's the problem, right? There are so many voices calling us. What voices are calling you today? What do you need to turn off in your life so that you can hear Jesus calling? Philip Yancey, one of my favorite authors, another writer, relates how in his book, Disappointment with God, if you're disappointed with God, I strongly recommend the book. But anyway, Philip Yancey writes about this. A man who's swimming in a large lake at dusk. He's going out about 100 yards offshore, and fog rolls in. He couldn't see really in any direction. Can't even see what direction is west. Can't find the setting sun. So he's flailing about for a half hour, getting very worried. He's never going to find his way. He goes one way, figures that's not right, goes the other way, keeps circling around until eventually he just quieted down. And he heard a voice calling him from the shore. And he followed the sound of that voice safely home. That's what Jesus is asking you to do. Maybe you feel like you're flailing about in your life, at work, at home, with your relationships, with your finances. Maybe you're fearful you can't find the shore. Well, then just relax. It's not that hard. Just listen for the voice of Jesus. And remember, listening for the voice of Jesus is done with your eyes. Look for what Carolyn Lewis says, the valleys of death and depression and despair are not traveled alone. Someone will be Jesus who will walk with you. You see, what Jesus thinks about his sheep is this: they shall never perish. No one will ever snatch them from my hand. You know, Jesus doesn't have a loss factor. Maybe you run a business, right? And you say, well, you know, there's going to be a certain amount of loss. We have this inventory. There's going to be some inventory shrinkage or whatever. You accountants in the crowd, you know all that stuff. Jesus doesn't have inventory shrinkage. Jesus doesn't have a loss factor built into his business plan. Jesus, what do you think? Jesus went to the cross and died to save you, and he's going to say, oh, well, lost one in here or there. It's so bad. Too bad. So sad. No. Jesus says, I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish. That's what Jesus is saying to his sheep. Why should you become a sheep of Jesus? Because you will never perish, and no one will snatch you out of his hand. He says, my Father, who has given them to me. Think about that, will you? Maybe someone has said to you, and in not so nice way, who do you think you are? You know, like God's gift to the earth? You can tell them yes, actually. Well, actually, you're God's gift to Jesus. That's what Jesus thinks about you. That you are a gift that Jesus has received. Now look, no one can snatch them out of my Father's hand. Now, I tried to find the word unsnatchable. It's not in the dictionary. Neither is snatchable, except it's a verb. I think it's a verb, right? I don't know. I'm not very good at English. But I think it's a verb. And so I think unsnatchable is like a verb. Don't put it in your English papers, students, because you probably get a red mark next to it. But this is what God is saying. There's somebody who wants to snatch you. Don't deny that in your life. There's somebody who wants to snatch you. But there's two really important things to think about that. One is you're someplace from which you can be snatched. You are in a place where you're snatchable, except that for God. You know, it's easy in the toy store of life to get lost. It's easy in the toy store of life to run into those who would do evil to you. But the good news is that the Father has chosen you, has given you to Jesus, and just as Jesus was given you, so Jesus and the Father are one. They're both doing the same thing, and that is to make sure that you are unsnatchable. I love this George Whitefield, a famous preacher, long time ago. They shall never perish, though they often think they shall perish. By the hand of their lusts and corruptions, they think they shall perish by the deceitfulness of their hearts, but Christ says they shall never perish. I have brought them out of the world to myself, and do you think I will let them go to hell after that? I give them eternal life. Pray after that, he preaches. So God chooses you. Isn't that great comfort? You don't have to worry about choosing God. Relax. God is calling you. God has chosen you. That's the foundation of our faith. That's the foundation of John's gospel. It's not up to you. It's up to God, and God has done it. Now just sit in his hand and relax and follow the voice of the one who holds you. I know there's much fear out there. I know, people like my good friends, right? Jim and Marion, Rosie. I understand many of you others, the fear of the doctor's report, the fear for some of you, not them, but for some of you, you have other fears, right? The monthly checking account statement, the credit card bill, the job review. You're in retirement wondering, what am I going to do with my time? You're worried about all sorts of things. I am too, right? So Jesus says, look, let me lead you from fear to confidence. Let the Father cause you to lie down in green pastures. Well, here we are on this fourth Sunday of Easter. And today we're celebrating our unsnatchability. We're celebrating the resurrection grip of God. Matthew Henry writes that he that secured the glory of the Redeemer will secure the glory of the redeemed. What he means is this. God who held Jesus in his hand at the cross, in the tomb, and out of the tomb, that same God is holding you in the same way. One last bit from Calvin, and we're done. These verses show that the elect are absolutely certain of their salvation. That word elect scares people. It shouldn't scare you. It simply means this: God chose you. You didn't choose God. God chose you. You can be absolutely certain of your salvation. He writes, in short, our salvation is certain because it is in the hand of God. For our faith is weak, we are prone to waver, but God, who has taken us under his protection, is sufficiently powerful to scatter with his breath alone all the forces of our adversaries, for the power of God is invincible. In our apparent weakness, we are snatchable, we think. But in the powerful hand of God, in the hand of the great shepherd, we are and remain the unsnatchables.